Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 17, The Forest of Mirth. Having failed to ride as early as they intended, the riders got a late start and spent most of the day playing catch-up. They rode across the rocky hills and crossed a river into the grasslands. By day they spotted prairie horses in the meadows and beavers in the river, and by night they heard the howlings of coyotes and wolves. For now, only shadows stalked the night. Early morning dew glistened on the tall blades of the prairie grass as the dawning sun rose over the peaks of high-reaching mountains in the east. One by one, the riders reluctantly rolled out their dew-soiled blankets, moaned under their breaths as the sun shone upon their faces, but it was absent of its warmth as the chill of the air overtook it. With warrior arms, Mongard rammed an arrow through a bird and stuck it over a fire. After much morning coffee, they rolled up their bedrolls. Navi languished under the covers because of the pain in his thigh and ankle. Gilmanza and Osney sipped on freshly brewed coffee while Boldar watched Mongard jerk like a madman. Cosby sat on a log by himself near the smoldering fire. "Navi, are you okay?" asked Osney. Navi moaned just enough for Osney to know that he was at least alive, and then spoke with some effort. "I feel like I've been fighting monsters, and one of them bit a chunk out of my flesh out of my thigh and nearly bit off my ankle." His voice grew a little stronger now. "Oh, wait! Maybe that's because I have been fighting monsters, and one did nearly take off my leg." He was laughing a bit now. Osney and Boldar helped Navi up. He moaned with every move. "What's up with this guy?" Boldar whispered, nodding his head towards Mongard. "Oh, just the way he is," Navi explained. Boldar handed Navi a cup of spicy tea, and Navi took a big swig. The bitter taste jolted him awake as he immediately spewed it out of his mouth. "Oh, that's nasty." The group of riders roared with laughter at the gag, all knowing full well what Boldar was up to no good. A man should never seek revenge, but he should always take the opportunity to give back what a man has earned, Boldar said with a chuckle. "Don't worry. They say a bitter herb comes out much better than it does going down, mate." The riders roared with laughter as Navi dumped the cup of bitter tea onto the ground. Boldar poured Navi a cup of steaming coffee. The prophet and Sore both laughed now as they playfully taunted each other with empty threats of revenge. "Here, I'll roll up your bedroll, mate," volunteered Osney, "while you drink your coffee." "Thanks, crony." Navi hobbled to where the other riders sat, sipping on their cups of hot brew. "Ah, you're such a sissy," said Boldar, teasing Navi. "Mongard got a plug taken out of him, and you don't see anyone rolling up his bedroll." "You call that a plug? This is a plug," Navi said, pointing to his leg. He pulled off the bandage, knowing it was desperately needing to be changed. The wound was deep, red, and raw. The constant rubbing of the writing on his raw flesh, expanding every puncture made in the skin by the Derv's teeth. "Navi, that's gross." Boldar leaned over, wincing at the gape of flesh. Navi washed it off, put some ointment on it, and wrapped it back up. After a sloppy breakfast of bread and fowl, the riders mounted their beast. Rising into mountainous terrain of the Forest of Mirth, carpeted with timber and tapestries of wildflowers, they crossed a series of rocky rivets and ravines. Forced to accommodate Navi, they rode slower than usual. "Come on, sissy," Boldar teased mercilessly. "It's nothing but a flesh wound." "I'll sissy you in a minute," said Navi, twitching his upper lip. "Mama's boy." "Hey, panty wearer, why don't you just, do one of those poofa thingamajiggies?" laughed Boldar, knowing that Navi could take it. "I think I will," Navi snarled. "Turn you into a pile of horse dung." The two picked and teased, Osney egging them on. Riding through the pathless terrain, the group navigated over chiseled peaks of limestone. Then they passed through a stream of fresh spring water, gilded by the rays of the sun. The riders were casually trotting along when suddenly they came across a human skeletal leaning against a rock, its hands folded across its lap. Dingy brown moss hung from the tree, grazing the top of the cracked skull of the human remains. Stopping to look at the skeleton and each other, the riders hushed, but continued at a slow and assiduous amble. Advancing across the stream of water, they noticed a dead Derv, its blood staining the rock it had died upon. Another derv lay near, its head lay open. Two more dervs were within proximity, their abdomens slashed open and entrails spilled to the ground. Someone's been in a fight with these devils, said Gilmanza. The riders pulled their swords, steeling themselves for what was ahead. The noise of fallen rock shattering on limestone floor broke their conversation. It sounded as though it was coming from the shady mouth of a small cliff overhanging on the opposite side of the stream. A hollow space set back inside the cliff, providing just enough room for shelter. Dismounting, Boldar tried to take the lead, but Gilmanza put him in his place by interrupting him. Osney, Boldar, and Mongard, come with me. Navi, you and Cosby stay back with the mounts. Cosby sighed as he grabbed the reins of the mounts. Somebody has to do it. Cosby sat down on the rock and waited and watched. He felt out of place because he didn't know the other men. His skill seemed to go unnoticed. He resented staying behind and not feeling like he was a significant part of the team. Paying Gilmanza no mind, Navi insisted on hobbling along with them. Now Cosby really stewed with resentment. Using his staff as a walking stick, Navi stubbornly followed behind them, feeling pain with each step. With swords drawn, they crept towards the darkened entrance of the recess of a giant boulder. Heavy foliage hung over the nearly secret cavity. The redundant dripping of water off the leaves enticed them and crowded their listening ears with repetitive noise. Hovering at the side of the entrance, they waited, hearts beating at the dark mystery of the forest. Steadily, they positioned themselves around the entrance of the cave, their hearts pounding in their chests as they tried to curb the sound of their own breaths. Gilmanza nodded his head, and they leapt in front of the mouth of the recess, their steel swords drawn. Spears met them, and they all froze as they assessed the uncertain and deadly situation. Between the crevices of two rocks in the cavern-like recess in the cliff were two people. At least they looked like people at first glance. In their hands were sharpened spears, carved from wood of the forest. River water dripped from the rocks above them onto the greasy heads as they stood boldly ready to defend themselves. A dark pug nose jutted above the stone, and two dark, deep-set eyes stared back at them, eyes with a certain aura about them, mysterious yet peaceful. "We mean you no harm," Gilmanza said, attempting to bring peace to the situation. "Who are you?" the older man asked. "Just passing through," Gilmanza said. Coming out from behind the rocks, the riders observed that they were filthy, their clothing wet, dirty, and torn. It was then that they noticed that the younger one looked nothing like the other. He was rather sheepish in appearance, or was it goatish? One thing was irrefutable. He wasn't a hint. His face was less like that of a man than Osney's. His nose looked a lot like something from the animal kingdom, too. His animal ears were folded over like earmuffs and covered his hair, and his hairline in the front came down almost to his eyebrows. His teeth were straight and pretty, not crooked like Osney's. A tuft of fur, like tangled curls, was jumbled up on his head, much like the wool of an animal. This furry, thick lump of wool-like hair hung just past his neck and was a burnt brown shade, nearly the same color as his shirt. That is, what was left of his tattered clothing. His body was humanoid except for the cleft feet, which, although long and flat like a human's, had two nubs instead of 5 toes spanning the foot. The soles of his feet were solid like a hoof, not fleshly like a human's. He had dirty scattered prigs of curly hair that stood on end, scattered all over his body except for his face. It was sort of odd how the body hair grew, randomly, here and there, but his eyes were captivating, large and dark. The fellow with him looked like any other human being. The riders looked critically at them, especially the younger one with the weird facial features. His sheep-like characteristics made him appear unimpressive, except for his big eyes. They were strong, yet innocent, discerning, yet gracious. The riders studied him through eerie silence and awkward stares, especially his peculiar feet. "What business do you have here?" asked the older one. His wooden spear pointed at Navi's belly button. "Our business is none of your business, crony." Navi couldn't take his eyes off the younger one, particularly his eyes. They held him mesmerized with a certain aura. There was something deep, profound in his eyes. Navi stared at him to the point of embarrassment. There's something about you, a destiny, Navi said. Navi could feel it, the ecstatic movement through his spirit. He couldn't put his finger on it exactly, but the young man was destined for a mission, called to an assignment. He had a feeling that he had not stumbled across these chaps for no reason. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Osney inquired. "It's terribly dangerous. I see you have had a run-in with a few dervs." "Yes, we have had more than a few disagreements with those devils," answered the older fellow. "We live out here," answered the younger one. Suddenly it dawned on Gilmanza. You're an Ani. But how can that be? I thought Anis were extinct. In fact, I'm positive." "How is it that you know of an extinct people?" the Ani asked. "He's old, real old," Navi said. "Didn't I tell you to stay with the mounts?" said Gilmanza. "How long have you been living out here?" Osney asked. "My son and I have lived in a cave near here for 2 months now," answered the older one. "And as far as it being dangerous, well, it's no more dangerous than being under the power of the Oshwaks." "The Oshwaks?" answered Gilmanza. "What do you mean, under the power of the Oshwaks?" "Where have you been?" asked the elder. "They have taken over our village and oppressed my people for many months now. My name is Sagron, and this is my son Amace. My son and I don't mean to be rude," Navi interrupted, "but how is it that your son, he looks nothing like you?" "My wife and I found him one day. We were walking in the woods and we heard a cry of a baby. He was all alone. We took him in as our own. We've never seen another like him." "That's because there are no more like him," said Gilmanza, puzzled. "Our village has been overtaken by Oshwaks. My wife," he paused to settle his quaking voice, "she was caught trying to escape, trying to meet us here in the forest. It's all my fault. I'm the one who suggested we run." Sagron fought to hold back the tears that were forming in the corner of his eyes. After a while he gathered himself and continued. "These skeletons you have passed in the forest are the remains of my people who attempted to escape. My people have been reduced to nothing. They have violated our women and reduced us to slaves. Come, let me show you my people, my village." "Can I ride with one of you?" "Certainly," answered Osney. "Did you know that the Oshwaks were originally the Bardoras, and they migrated to a land they now possess where when their king went on a murderous rampage?" asked Boldar. "No, I don't believe I knew that," Sagron answered, and thought to himself that he really didn't care about irrelevant histories. "Yeah, their King Rahul, lost his mind and began to purge his kingdom of all subjects he believed were after his throne, which in his sick mind was everyone." "Well, I don't think he wants to hear about the history of the Ashwaks," Gilmanza said, politely silencing him. Boldar took it all in stride, unoffended by Gilmanza's soft rebuke. Walking back to their mounts, Sagron and Amace noticed Navi hobbling and occasionally grunting in pain, noisily lamenting over his wounded leg. "What happened?" asked Sagron. "A derv bit my leg." "A derv? Those nasty things carry diseases. I sure hope you don't catch anything from it." "Well, me too." "You know," Boldar stepped in, rubbing his goatee, "they say that whiskey and honey are the best thing for a derv bite. Then you should apply some Mambergen tree root. Of course, Mambergen tree root will heal anything." "Well, I'll take my chances," Navi said. "Don't you have a sword?" asked Amace. Boldar and Osney roared with laughter. The new kid had insulted Navi without even meaning to. Navi rolled his eyebrow at Amace. "What do you think I had pointing at you just then?" "Didn't notice yours particularly. There were several in my face." "Well, don't you see one hanging around my waist?" "Can I ride the dragon?" Amace asked, avoiding Navi's question. Navi agreed. The kid was, after all, rather chipper about seeing the scaly beast. He happily leapt on the Inca behind Navi, while Sagron rode with Cosby. They traveled north through the tree-filled woods, trekking up the craggy hills to the tree line of the ridge of a cliff. As they dismounted, Sagron said, "Be very quiet. Look over the edge of the rocks into the Valley of Mirth." Peering over the jagged rocks, they could see below a simple town, small yet fortified, and in the clutches of a strong and brutal people. The riders noted that the walls of the town were not very tall in comparison to more noble walls, but they were thick, with stone mortared to stone. Within the fortified town were frail-looking men, women and children, rails of flesh and bones, poorly nourished on bread, water, and rice, all working under forced labor. Their feet were shackled and their bodies dirty. Some bore marks across their backs where they had been beaten. Ashwok warriors ruled with a rod of iron. The crack of the whip kept the prisoners in line, doing exactly as they were commanded. They overpowered them and strapped the people to a life of ruthless oppression. The slaves looked worn out and dirty, bent over. Premature wrinkles shone on their faces in the folds of pain and misery. They had been stripped of their dignity, robbed of freedom. Our people have lost hope, said Sagron. We have no comfort except through each other, no dignity except the dignity that we can remember, no future but the future we dream about, no life except through death. What say you, cronies, we do a little liberating? Navi pulled his sword from the sheath. Now, we'll see how much of a nuisance us prophets are. He crossed his eyes at Boldar and laughed. Let's ride, cronies, let's ride.